Hi guys, we are back with more of The Terrible to Get Worse by Jory, John, and Mac Barnett, illustrated by Kevin Cornell. We were on chapter 7. Let's get started. Nobody liked to go to meetings of the Yanni Valley School Board, not even the Yanni Valley School Board. That Wednesday, only 2 of its 5 members were in attendance, Mr. Carl Sykes and Mrs. Melinda Chunch. Mr. Sykes wore an unappealing mustache, and so did Mrs. Chunch. The audience was small too. Miss Miles Murphy, Niles Sparks, and Barry Barkin sat in the basement of the library, surrounded by 27 empty chairs. Principal Barkin gave Miles and Niles 2 thumbs up. The dynamic duo, here to save the day. Looks like we've got the naysayers outnumbered, boys, 3-0. Mrs. Chunch banged a gavel loudly, which she loved doing, and which was really the only reason she'd shown up. This should be interesting, Niles said. It was the first time anyone had ever said this about a Yanni Valley School Board meeting. It took a while to get to the interesting part. First, there was a roll call, which took much longer than it should have. The board approved the minutes of the last meeting and the agenda for the next meeting. Mrs. Chunch read aloud the mission statement of the Yanni Valley Unified School District. Principal Barkin grunted approvingly through the recitation, and when Mrs. Chunch finished, he applauded a little bit. Then came votes on whether to approve the new recess restriction policy, 2 ayes, the supplemental services memorandum of understanding, 2 ayes, and a contract to finish the floors of the gym at Yanni Valley Science and Letters Academy, 2 ayes. When you say aye, that means like you agree with him. If you think this paragraph was boring to read, imagine what it was like to sit in a metal folding chair while it actually happened. 36 minutes into the meeting came Agenda Item K, open public hearing on the administration of Barry Barkin. Mr. Sykes read from a crisp sheet of paper. There has been recent concern over Principal Barkin's stewardship of Yanni Valley Science and Letters Academy, arising first with the cancellation of school on April 1st of last year and increasing due to an ongoing epidemic of practical jokes. Epidemic, muttered Principal Barkin. An epidemic apparently unchecked by principal power. This meeting invites members of the community to speak about the Barkin administration. The floor is now open, said Mrs. Chunch, banging the gavel. You didn't need to bang the gavel for that, Melinda, said Mr. Sykes. Chairwoman Chunch, said Mrs. Chunch. Acting chairwoman, said Mr. Sykes, only because Jeff isn't here. Which, according to bylaw 34D, makes me chair. I can bang the gavel at my discretion. If you bang the gavels willy-nilly, said Mr. Sykes, it loses all meaning. Mrs. Chunch looked right at Mr. Sykes and banged her gavel some more. That's just great, said Mr. Sykes. Why don't you show some restraint? You're just jealous of my gavel, said Mrs. Chunch. Mr. Sykes didn't really have anything to say to that. Mrs. Chunch cleared her throat and banged the gavel again. The floor is now open. Citizens of Yanni Valley are invited to approach the microphone. Miles was the first to speak. He walked up to a microphone stand that stood a few feet in front of the table where the school board sat. I don't really think we need a microphone, he said, looking around the room. We always use microphones, said Mrs. Chunch into her microphone. Bylaw 17T. Okay, said Miles. He took out a sheet of binder paper. My name is Miles Murphy. The speaker squeaked hideously. There's something wrong with his microphone, said Mr. Sykes. Gus, would you bring us a new microphone? Gus, who worked at the county library most nights, hurried in with a new microphone and began fiddling with cords. I really think I can do this without it, Miles said. Mrs. Chunch raised the gavel to silence him. Testing, Gus said into the microphone. 7 years ago, a screaming comes across the sky. Such were the joys when we all girls and boys in our youth time were seen on the echoing green. He gave the table the okay. This one should work, folks. Mrs. Chunch banged the gavel. Resume. My name is Miles Murphy, Miles said. From my first day at school last year, Principal Barkin has been a welcoming presence and a wise and guiding authority figure. He learned my name right away and was a friendly face while I became accustomed to my new school. Principal Barkin believes in my potential and makes sure I achieve my best. And he introduced me to my best friend. Only the first and last sentences of his speech were true, but that was fine. Mrs. Chunch smiled. Thank you, Miles. Thank you, Miles said. He took his seat. Principal Barkin leaned over and whispered, A little short, Miles, and light in terms of content related to my principal power, but altogether not too bad. Niles Sparks was the next to step up. Lady and gentlemen of the school board, I'm here to tell you about my hero. A great man, a powerful man, a principal, Principal Barkin. Here we go, Barkin said, pumping his fists a little. Niles Sparks praised the leadership of Principal Barkin in a 7-minute presentation, enhanced by visual aids intended to supplement the school board's understanding, charts, photographs, and even a diorama. When he was finished, the school board gently applauded. Barkin cried a little bit. Nice one, Miles said when Niles sat down. I think we did well, said Niles. They gave each other a high two. What's that? Barkin asked. A secret handshake? Neat! I think I missed it. Will you show it to me? Anyone else? Asked Mrs. Chunch. Barkin stood hastily. Me, he said. He buttoned his blazer and came up to the microphone. Let's do this, Barry, he said to himself. Principal Barkin was proud of his many accomplishments as a principal, but he was probably proudest of his mastery of a rhetorical mode beloved by principals, the power speech. A power speech is meant to impress the listener and elevate the speaker. And last night, Principal Barkin had stayed up late, cooking up a doozy. There was no doubt. This was the speech of his career. Words had flowed, power had radiated, metaphors had popped into his mind like a self-cranking jack in the box, but just the jack, obviously, not the box. The jack was the metaphor, and it wasn't a creepy jack, the kind that was scary with a creepy clown face, but a nice smiling jack with a face that was beautiful and simple, like his metaphors. Distinguished school board members, I am Principal Barkin, the principal in question, the speaker squealed. There's no need to shout, said Mrs. Chunch. You have a microphone. She was hard to hear. Barkin had blown out the sound system. Gus, shouted Mr. Sykes. The back doors opened, but instead of a smiling Gus, there stood a frowning former Principal Barkin. The room gasped audibly, which was impressive since there were only 5 gaspers. Bertrand Barkin strode to the front of the room. Sit down, Barry, he said. Barry Barkin backed up and took a seat in the front row. Former Principal Barkin adjusted some knobs on an AV cart and tapped the microphone. The speakers were back on. Melinda, Carl, my apologies for showing up in the middle of things. I'm sure you'll understand that after I retired from the school board, I promised myself not to be present at any more of these meetings than I had to be. Mrs. Chunch and Mr. Sykes chuckled. Let's be brief. I don't want to waste any more of your time. As you just witnessed, my son lacks discipline, and so his school lacks discipline. The pranks at Yanni Valley Science and Letters Academy are out of control. They're cutting into instruction time, and they're making our district a laughingstock. I happen to know from colleagues that we're the butt of many a joke in the teacher's lounge over in Cherry Valley. No father likes to speak ill of his own son, but I feel I'm a man with 2 children, and one of them is Yanni Valley Science and Letters Academy. And Bob, Principal Barkin said from the front row. Bertrand Barkin glared at Barry. Yes, Bob. 3 children. Barry and Bob and the school. And the school is in crisis. And in a crisis, we must take action. And so I submit the following proposal. That Principal Barkin take an involuntary, indefinite leave of absence. You want to fire me? Said Principal Barkin. That's your second interruption, said former Principal Barkin. And it's not what I said. It's pretty much what you said. It's not what he said, said Mr. Sykes, looking at his notes. He said, an involuntary, indefinite leave of absence. Now, just a minute, Bertrand, said Mrs. Chunch. Who would replace him? A powerful principal who can put an end to all this nonsense. Former Principal Barkin leaned into the microphone. Me. What? Said Principal Barkin. Order, said Mrs. Chunch. Bang, bang went the gavel. I hereby submit the following motion for a vote, said former Principal Barkin. Can he even do that? Said Principal Barkin. Yes, said Mr. Sykes. That effective immediately, Principal Barkin take an involuntary, indefinite leave of absence, and that I, Bertrand Barkin, take over in his stead. Aye, said Mr. Sykes. Nay, said Mrs. Chunch. It was a tie. According to Bylaw 98J, in the event of a tie, the deciding vote is cast by the school board's member at large. The school board's member at large was Bertrand Barkin. He voted in favor of his own proposal. Barry Barkin was out of a job.